Thank you very much indeed for that, Gordon. Now, our third speaker is Lord Stoddart of Swindon. For me, Lord Stoddart has an impeccable political pedigree. Public service began for him in 1952, when he was elected to Reading Borough Council. He served as a councillor for 20 years, and for the last 7 years as leader of the council. That was at a time when being leader of a council carried considerable responsibilities. Councils had powers and responsibilities that had not been curtailed by Whitehall. David Stoddart had considerable power and responsibilities for the well-being and development of Reading itself. In 1970, at the second attempt, David entered Parliament as the Member of Parliament for Swindon. There were no SPADs at that time. Political parties have always benefited from having bright young intellectuals like Peter Shaw or John Biffin. But the advent of youthful pole climbers with identikit backgrounds who now control our political parties is a profoundly retrograde step. In the House of Commons, David served his party and his constituency in a number of capacities, including being in the Labour Whip's office, while the Callaghan government struggled to maintain a majority. No job for a political virgin. Following his defeat at the 1983 general election, David Stoddart was elevated to the House of Lords. Again, he served his party in many capacities, but eventually the twists and turns of New Labour became too much. In 2001, he was expelled for backing a socialist candidate in St Helens, rather than the Tory defector, Sean Woodward. Today, Lord Stoddart is one of the upper house most diligent and effective members. He is usually one of the last to leave before beginning his journey home to Reading. His flow of written questions, usually on the subject of the European Union, continually exposes the deficiencies of our membership. When I saw David last Tuesday, I asked him whether he might be referring to that great speech of Hugh Gaitskell's, when he said that if we joined the common market, we would be saying goodbye to 1,000 years of British history. How right he was. He must have foreseen developments like the European arrest warrant. And when I put that to David, he replied, "Well, I probably was there." Ladies and gentlemen, will you give a warm welcome to Lord Stoddart of Swindon?
Well, thank you, Barry, but how on earth am I going to live up to that? It's very nice of you, and yes, of course it's all true. And I would add one thing, that in those days, leaders of the council didn't get paid. They did it for nothing. But let me, I'm going to take you back a bit in history. I've been around this issue for 53 years. 53 long years. And I made my first speech in 1962, the same year as that great man, Gaitskell, told us exactly what the Treaty of Rome was about and what the future was about, and that this country was going to lose 1,000 years of history. And I made my first speech when I was the candidate for Newbury. A very safe Tory seat, I must say, and it was made in Woolhampton in Berkshire. And I've made so many speeches since that I forget the number. But when I speak to the House of Lords, which is becoming full now of ex-commissioners and ex-MEPs, I always make one thing absolutely clear. I tell them that I was against joining the European community, or the common market as it then was, and that I believe that Britain would thrive outside it. And the third thing I say to them is that this issue transcends party politics. It is about who governs Britain. And it's always been about that. And unfortunately, politicians have allowed themselves, God knows why, to be swayed by the idea that Britain is no longer able to govern itself. And of course it all started with Mr. Heath. Let's not forget Mr. Heath. Because he asked in 1970 for, let's see what he said. He said he wanted a mandate to negotiate, no more and no less, and that he wouldn't join the common market without the full-hearted consent of the British people. That's what he said. That's what he said. And he fooled his own party and fooled the rest of the country. And when we had the second reading of the bill, and I was there voting against the bill, the result was 309 to 301. Hardly the full-hearted consent of the British people. And of course there was no referendum. And we joined on the 1st of January in 1973. Unfortunately, even then, we had a sleepy Parliament, most of whom had not read the Treaty of Rome, because had they read it, they would know what the future has become. I don't know what that is, but it was a sleepy Parliament, as I say, and they hadn't read the treaty. But there is actually a mistaken belief that we did have a referendum. But the only referendum we had was whether we should stay in the common market. And, of course, that referendum was brought about because there was a big split in the Labour Party. Some strange things were said around that time. And I've got a quotation here from one of the politicians, a leading politician. In fact, he was the Labour leader at the time. Labour's leader is under no illusions as to what EEC membership will mean to the next Labour government. Writing last year in the New Socialist, Neil Kinnock made it clear that we cannot continue to tolerate the continued outflow of investment and employment imposed by membership without any compensating improvement in our trade. That was Neil Kinnock. Now he says, of course, that if the facts change, you have to change with them. But the facts haven't changed. They're exactly the same now as they were then. And it's getting worse, I'm afraid. And, of course, there was this referendum. And Wilson was the Prime Minister. And, of course, the government, here it is, sent out the paper. I keep these things by me in case I need them, and I need them for tonight. This is the government New Deal in Europe. And Wilson promised that he had renegotiated the treaty. And he says this: there was a threat to employment in Britain from the movement in the common market towards an economic and monetary union. This could have forced us to accept fixed exchange rates for the pound, restricting industrial growth and so putting jobs at risk. This threat has been removed. Well, we know that that was a lie, because we got economic and monetary union, and what a disaster it has been for those who've joined it. So that you can't really believe what politicians tell you at one stage. And of course the British people were fooled into voting to remain in, although I have to say that a third of the electorate said they wanted to come out. So no significant changes were really made, and the British people, in actual fact, the British people were misled at that particular point. I mean, I myself, quite frankly, and many others, were so distraught about it that we predicted that there would be rioting in the streets. And of course we were laughed out of court, except that we were right. There's been rioting in the streets in Greece, in Portugal, in Spain, as we actually predicted. And there will be more, make no mistake about that. So the conduct of the referendum was, in fact, a mistake. Sorry, I'm getting old. I am old. What I was going to say was that the campaign was a disgrace. The Yes campaign had all the people, or all the big people with them, and the No campaign had very little. They had little backing. The Yes campaign had £20 million behind them, and they were supported by the Labour government, by the Tories, the Liberals, the multinationals, virtually all the national newspapers, the BBC, and the CIA. So that was the support that the Yes campaign got. People now come and say to me, we're winning. They say, David, we're winning. I wish I could be sure of that. But remember, the same old people as were around in 1975 are still there. Remember, they're still there, preaching that Britain could not survive outside the European Union, and they have been joined by the President of the United States and, of course, the bishops. The bishops have recommended in their new encyclical, what is it they call it? But anyway, they recommend that there should be further integration. And of course they've also said that a living wage should be paid to everyone. But of course they're not paying it themselves. And I would recommend the bishops to read Matthew 7:3, I think it is. It's something about the mote in thy brother's eye and the beam in thine own eye. So before they speak, they probably ought to think. And of course other institutions will wear. We're going to have the same old lies being told about 3 million people at stake. That's already been dealt with. That's been blown apart anyway by our previous speakers tonight. and also by a lot of many pamphlets, including the Bruce Group and others. The same old insults are being thrown at us. In 1975, we were ignorant little Englanders, and horror of horrors, we were Bennites. You know, Mr. Ben, in actual fact, got the referendum by fighting for it. Today, we are still called little Englanders, and even worse, Cameron, he thinks that we're loonies, fruitcakes, and closet racists. Who is it? Michael Howard, I think, thinks we're cranks, gadflies, and extremists. And now, and of course, Tony Blair thinks we're unpatriotic. Thinks we're actually unpatriotic because we believe in Britain and being governed by ourselves. And now we have Mr. Bowles. Mr. Bowles, who thinks that people like us are Luddites. Perhaps he's forgotten who the Luddites were. He seems to have a bad memory because he couldn't remember the name of any businessman who had made donations to the Labour Party. Now, I like helping people out, so let me help him out and give him just one name. John Mills. John Mills, a lifetime member of the Labour Party, a highly successful businessman, donated £1.65 million to the Labour Party last year. Now, you'd think he would remember something like that. But there we are. He forgets who gives him £1.6 million. Now, I don't think any of us in this room would forget that, now would we? But there we are. John Mills is a well-known Eurosceptic. He's the secretary of the Labour Party committee against Europe, and he's the co-chairman of Business for Britain. But Mr. Bowles forgets all about him. Now, if that's the way he treats his benefactors, God help us all if he ever becomes Chancellor of the Exchequer. So, but these people are the very same people who are urging us to join the Eurozone and scrap the pound. Again, they predicted disaster if we didn't join, that we would run up on the rocks, that we'd be sidelined, we wouldn't have a place in the world. You know it. You know it all. They've said it all. But of course there has been a disaster. Not in Britain, but in the Eurozone. That is a complete and utter disaster. If we joined, we would now be wallowing in low or no growth, high unemployment, falling living standards, and ways must be found to counter their influence, because they still, unfortunately, although they're horribly wrong, they still have influence in high places. Now, I've referred to the past because it impinges on the present and the future. At present, the Labour Party and the Liberals are in favour of staying in, come what may. Mandelson believes that we will join the single currency. He'll learn nothing. He still thinks that we should join the single currency. What do you make of people like that? I mean, I don't know what to make them. Perhaps you can. So there's no firm commitment to a referendum by them. The Scots and Welsh Nats have announced that they will campaign to stay in. And of course UKIP is the single party of any note that will campaign to come out. Cameron is committed to an in or out referendum after negotiation for reform. But what does that mean? First of all, is there any reform possible? I very much doubt it. I can't think of any way in which the European Commission and the other nation states are going to give us anything that would be worthwhile. After all, but I mean, what does he believe in? He sees the EU as a beacon of freedom and democracy, a guarantor of peace, and a successful economic, financial and trading entity. He believes that the EU should extend from the Atlantic to the Urals. And he believes also that Turkey should be admitted to the EU. Well, now, does anybody really believe all that he thinks about Europe? I mean, the very reverse is true. It's not democratic, it's not progressive, and it really is falling apart. But they're keeping it together, whatever happens. And Turkey, I looked up the figures. I think people generally think that Turkey is just a small little country with no importance. It's got a population of 77 million. The religion is 96% registered Muslim. And per capita income is 12,200 per annum. Their armed forces are 423,000. 315,000 in the army, 48,000 in the navy, Air Force 60,000. Now compare that with our little army that we've got. And what it really means is that Turkey is going to be one of the leading countries, in fact the leading country by the time they got in the European Union, with a Muslim population of about 70 million. Just imagine the changes that are going to happen throughout. And yet, the Prime Minister wishes them to join the EU. So, just exactly what does he believe? I really want to believe that if we have a Cameron government, that he could negotiate something. But I'm certain that he can't. And I wish that if that happened, he would recommend withdrawal. That's what I'd like him to be able to do, and I'm sure everybody else in the room would like him to do. He's not going to do it. I've asked 5 questions, asking whether if the government doesn't get what they want, the results from negotiation, will they recommend withdrawal? And they will not answer that question. So that means that it's another fib. Whatever happens, they're not going to come out. They believe that our place is there, and that's where they want us to stay. But the other thing about it is this, that they believe, and they have said, that the Eurozone should have further integration by being responsible for fiscal policy. And indeed that's been confirmed by the Governor of the Bank of England. So while they're saying, on the one hand, that there shouldn't be further integration, they are recommending further integration within the Eurozone. No, you can't have it both ways. And I fear that they understand perfectly well that if the Eurozone has fiscal policy, then eventually we will have to join it. And I think that's the trick. But of course there's no certainty that we'll have a referendum at all. The general election could bring about a situation where even if the Tories become the largest party, a referendum bill in Parliament could be defeated by the opposition parties combining to defeat it. So don't believe that we are certain to have a referendum. The general election could upset all that. However, let us assume that we do have an in-out referendum. We will be up against all the people and organisations that I've already mentioned. But events also have a part to play, and they being played out just at this very moment in Ukraine. And the Ukraine is being used to frighten people into believing that Russia is about to invade the Baltic states and take over the whole of Ukraine. Now, that's what they are telling us. Russophobia is being stoked up, and Putin is being demonized. Now, the result of that, and they know it, is likely to be that voters will seek security by remaining in the EU. There is another factor, and it's all been very cleverly done. There is another factor, and that is just tell her how old I am when I go back to the 20th century, 19th century, 20th century, that in 2017 the United Kingdom will hold the presidency of the EU, with all the razzmatazz that goes with it, and the Europhiles will use it to aggrandize the EU, and that we are an essential part of it. So, these things are done. They're thinking ahead. They're planning their campaign at the present time. The Euro-realist campaign will not have the resources of these stay-inners, but we do have the soul of truth about the reality of the EU, and we should wield it. And a lot of this is being done at present by a number of people and organisations, as I've already said, including the Bruges Group. We must and can show also how Britain can thrive as a free and independent democratic nation outside the clammy, stifling embrace of the authoritarian corporate state which is the European. We can do it. We can thrive. We did it. We've done it for hundreds of years. We built an empire. We gave it away. But we're still a significant country in the world. Freed of its stifling laws and legislation, coupled with the ability to make our own trade deals to help our commerce and industry to thrive without having to ask the Brussels Commission, asking them permission to help our industry, to cease paying a gross annual tribute of over £20 billion a year. What other country pays them £20 billion a year to trade with them? Because that's what it means. America, everybody else, the Swiss, they trade with them without having to pay them a penny. And we're paying them £20 billion a year gross. And it helps also, of course, to pay for an overbearing bureaucracy and subsidising basket case nations. We would once again have a British foreign policy and have control of our borders and who should be allowed to settle here. We would be able to decide our own budget without first having to submit it to Brussels. People don't understand that we have to submit our budget to Brussels before Parliament sees it. That's how far it's got. And we could decide all our tax rates without asking for their consent. Just think of what we could do with 20 billion to help our own people. And after all, That's what members of parliament are elected for. They're not elected to give taxpayers' money ad lib to anybody else, to countries outside here, while cutting benefits and holding down wages in this country. And finally, we would have our laws made transparently by our own elected parliament and not by committees of bureaucrats sitting in secret and a polyglot council sitting in a foreign capital. We'd be able to govern ourselves, in other words. The world is where we should be. The world is out there with its 7.5 billion customers. Not 500 million, 7.5 billion customers. And they want to buy our goods. That is the prize of independence which we could have if we had leaders who believed in Britain and its people. I don't think we've got them in Parliament. I think we've got them here. And I think we've got the people out there. And that is the task that we have before us, in case we have an election, a referendum in 2017. Thank you very much.
Yes, I think it would be a mistake to conduct any referendum campaign fundamentally on economics only. That, I think, is the tendency. Almost all discussion about economics, and it always is a field in which it's very hard to get a settled opinion that I can convince others and others can convince me about. So I think there's another issue which is topical at the moment, and that is peace. Any party that advocates coming out of the European Union is in effect a peace party, because it is our entanglement with the European Union which is drawing us into conflict with the Russian Federation. It's injuring our trade already. It will introduce more problems, more trade problems, as the sanctions on Russia mount. So a peace party would be a powerful thing with a lot of people in this country. They will understand that membership of the European Union, continued membership, entangles us with protecting the borders of the European Union and the minds of our political elites. It extends from the Atlantic to the Urals, and that's a huge danger to us to get involved.
Yes, 2 points. On the trade, people are being made to forget what happened and why Russia reacted as they did. Yanukovych was the elected president, and the EU and the United States, including the United States senators, went in and supported the uprising or demonstration, whatever it was, with EU flags and the United States flags and what have you. And what happened was that Yanukovych was deposed. And if Russia, when they saw that the Ukraine might be coming part of NATO, then of course they would fight their borders. And I think we have to understand that. The other